In the world of sports, nothing matches the raw intensity of hockey rivalries. The sound of skates cutting through ice, bodies crashing against boards, and the roar of passionate fans tell a story that goes beyond the game. These aren't just matches on a schedule. They're battles that have been fought for generations, passing down from father to son, mother to daughter, creating memories that last forever. When two rival teams meet on the ice, history fills the arena. Every hit means more. Every goal carries extra weight, and every win becomes legendary. These aren't just games about points in the standings. They're about pride, about proving who's better, about earning respect the hard way through blood, sweat, and determination. Hockey rivalries are different from any other sport. Maybe it's because players can settle their differences right there on the ice. Maybe it's because hockey towns live and breathe their teams like no other fans. Or maybe it's simply because hockey players never forget. A hit from 10 years ago still matters today. A playoff loss from decades past still stings. The teams might change, the players might retire, but the hatred, the real, genuine dislike between rivals, that never goes away. Over the NHL's long history, countless rivalries have emerged, but only a select few have reached legendary status. These are the matchups that made fans circle their calendars months in advance. These are the games that divided families, split cities, and created stories that would be told for generations. These are the rivalries that helped build the NHL into what it is today. In ranking these epic battles, we looked at what truly makes a great rivalry. We considered the history, how long these teams have been fighting each other. We looked at memorable moments, the games, goals, and fights that people still talk about today. We measured the intensity, how much these teams really dislike each other. And most importantly, we examined the lasting impact these rivalries had on hockey itself. What you're about to see isn't just a list of hockey games. It's a story of bitter enemies, unlikely heroes, and unforgettable moments that define the sport. From original six battles that date back to the NHL's earliest days, to modern clashes that prove hockey rivalry is alive and well, these are the 5 greatest rivalries in NHL history. Each one has left its mark on the sport, created its own legends, and shown us why hockey isn't just a game. It's a passion passed down through generations. These are the rivalries that turn casual fans into diehards. These are the matchups that players dream about being part of. These are the games that write themselves into hockey history. Welcome to the top 5 NHL rivalries of all time. Rivalry number 5, Detroit Red Wings versus Colorado Avalanche. Coming in at number 5 is a rivalry that burned white-hot for 6 incredible years. The Detroit Red Wings and Colorado Avalanche didn't have decades of history between them, but what they lacked in longevity, they made up for in pure intensity. From 1996 to 2002, these teams gave hockey fans some of the most memorable moments in NHL history. The spark that lit this powder keg came during the 1996 Western Conference Finals. Colorado's Claude Lemieux delivered a devastating hit on Detroit's Chris Draper, sending him face-first into the boards. The hit left Draper with a broken jaw, shattered cheek, and broken nose. But more importantly, it left the Red Wings with a score to settle. The following season, on March 26, 1997, that score was settled in what became known as Fight Night at the Joe. The game erupted into one of the most famous brawls in hockey history, with even the goalies Patrick Roy and Mike Vernon squaring off at center ice. This wasn't just a hockey game. It was a statement that the Red Wings wouldn't be pushed around. What made this rivalry truly special was the talent on both sides. The Red Wings had Steve Yzerman, Brendan Shanahan, and Nicholas Lidstrom. The Avalanche countered with Joe Sakic, Peter Forsberg, and Patrick Roy. These weren't just tough guys looking for fights. These were some of the most skilled players in NHL history, competing at the highest level. Between 1996 and 2002, these teams dominated the Western Conference. They combined to win 5 Stanley Cups during this period, meeting each other in the playoffs 5 times. Each game between them felt like a Stanley Cup final, regardless of when it was played. The regular season didn't matter. These teams hated each other every time they stepped on the ice. The rivalry's intensity was fueled by the fact that both teams were fighting for the same prize. During this era, the road to the Stanley Cup usually went through either Detroit or Colorado. Their games weren't just about winning. They were about proving who was the best team in hockey. While the rivalry eventually cooled as players retired and moved on, its impact on hockey history remains undeniable. It showed that new rivalries could be just as intense as historic ones, and that genuine dislike between teams could create unforgettable hockey. The Red Wings and Avalanche may have only been bitter enemies for 6 years, but they packed enough hatred, skill, and memorable moments into those years to earn their place among hockey's greatest rivalries. Rivalry number 4. Boston Bruins versus Montreal Canadiens. Our fourth greatest rivalry stands as hockey's longest-running feud. The Boston Bruins and Montreal Canadiens have been battling each other since 1924, creating a rivalry that runs deeper than just hockey. It's about culture, language, and a civic pride. For nearly 100 years, these teams have played against each other more than 900 times. No other NHL rivalry comes close to matching this history. The numbers tell an incredible story. 34 playoff series between them, more than any other two teams in North American sports. The Canadiens have won 25 of these series, but every victory was hard-earned. What makes this rivalry special is how it captures the spirit of two proud hockey cities. Boston, the hub of English-speaking New England, against Montreal, the heart of French-speaking Quebec. Every game becomes a clash of cultures, traditions, and different styles of hockey. The Bruins traditionally played a tough, physical game, while the Canadiens were known for their speed and skill. The rivalry reached its boiling point in 1955 during what became known as the Richard Riot, when Montreal's Maurice "Rocket" Richard was suspended for the remainder of the season after a violent incident involving a Boston player. The city of Montreal erupted in protest. The incident went beyond hockey, becoming a symbol of French-Canadian identity and pride. Throughout the decades, the rivalry has given us some of hockey's greatest moments. The too-many-men penalty that cost Boston a trip to the Stanley Cup Finals in 1979. The 1952 playoff series where Sugar Jim Henry and Maurice Richard shook hands while both were bleeding. The 2011 first-round series that went to overtime in Game 7. Every generation has added its own chapter to this story, from Eddie Shore and Howie Morans in the 1920s to Ray Bourque and Patrick Roy in the 1990s to Zdeno Chara and Carey Price in recent years. The names change, but the intensity remains the same. Young players who join either team quickly learn what this rivalry means. Even in the modern NHL, where rivalries often fade due to league expansion and player movement, Bruins-Canadiens remain special. When these teams meet, the arenas are louder, the hits are harder, and the goals mean more. Their fans fill the buildings hours before game time, trading insults that their parents and grandparents used decades ago. This rivalry represents everything great about hockey: tradition, passion, and excellence. While the Red Wings and Avalanche showed us how quickly a rivalry can ignite, the Bruins and Canadiens prove that some hockey feuds truly are timeless. Rivalry number 3, New York Rangers versus New York Islanders. When two teams share the same city, you know the rivalry will be special. At number 3, we have the Battle of New York, the Rangers versus the Islanders. This rivalry divides families, splits neighborhoods, and turns New York's hockey fans against each other every time these teams meet. The Rangers were the original New York team, playing at the world-famous Madison Square Garden since 1926. When the Islanders joined the NHL in 1972, they were seen as the unwanted little brother, the suburban team trying to steal the Rangers spotlight. But what happened next shocked the hockey world. In just their 8th season, the Islanders didn't just challenge the Rangers, they launched a dynasty. From 1980 to 1983, they won 4 straight Stanley Cups, transforming from underdogs into champions. During this time, they eliminated the Rangers in 4 straight playoff series, each victory burning deeper into the hearts of Rangers fans. The rivalry created one of hockey's most famous chants. After Islanders defenseman Dennis Potvin delivered a hard hit that injured Rangers center Ulf Nielsen in 1979, Madison Square Garden began the "Potvin sucks" chant. Remarkably, this chant continues even today, decades after Potvin retired, showing how deeply this rivalry runs in New York hockey culture. Every game between these teams feels like a playoff match. The arenas fill with split crowds, Rangers blue against Islanders blue and orange. Chants battle back and forth, and bragging rights mean everything. A win against your city rival often means more than beating any other team in the league. The rivalry peaked again in 1994 when the Rangers finally broke their 54-year Stanley Cup drought. Their road to the Cup that year included a sweep of the Islanders in the first round, making their championship victory even sweeter. For Rangers fans, beating their local rivals on the way to the Cup was the perfect revenge for years of Islander dominance. What makes this rivalry unique is its personal nature. Players on both teams live in the same city, shop at the same stores, and eat at the same restaurants. Fans work together, go to school together, and often live in the same buildings. There's no escaping your rival. They're always right there, ready to remind you about the last game. The passion of this rivalry has never faded. Even during years when both teams struggled, games between them remained intense. Recent years have seen both teams become competitive again, bringing new energy to this classic feud. Young stars like the Rangers' Artemi Panarin and the Islanders' Matthew Barzal have added their own chapters to this ongoing story. The Battle of New York proves that sometimes the fiercest rivalries are the ones closest to home. While other NHL rivalries might span countries or decades, Rangers-Islanders shows us what happens when hockey divides a city right down the middle. Rivalry number 2, Chicago Blackhawks versus Detroit Red Wings. And number 2, we have a rivalry that defined NHL hockey for over 80 years. The Chicago Blackhawks and Detroit Red Wings faced each other 802 times before conference realignment separated them in 2013. This wasn't just a rivalry, it was a piece of NHL history written on ice. As original 6 teams, these organizations helped build the NHL into what it is today. Their first meeting in 1926 marked the beginning of what would become one of hockey's greatest feuds. Just 300 miles apart, Chicago and Detroit developed a natural rivalry that went beyond hockey. These were two proud Midwest industrial cities fighting for supremacy. The 1950s and 1960s gave this rivalry its golden age. Detroit's Gordie Howe and Chicago's Bobby Hull, two of hockey's greatest players, faced off regularly. Every game between these teams featured the sport's biggest stars. The Red Wings dominated the 1950s, while the Blackhawks answered back in 1960s, creating a perfect balance of power that kept the rivalry hot. What made this rivalry special was its consistency. Year after year, decade after decade, these teams played each other at least 8 times a season. Add in their 16 playoff series, and you have generations of players and fans who knew nothing but hatred for their rival. The games were so physical that they helped create the tough, hard-hitting style of hockey the NHL became famous for. Players who switched sides in this rivalry faced intense pressure. When Ted Lindsay went from Detroit to Chicago in 1957, he found himself battling against teammates he'd won 4 Stanley Cups with. These moments added personal drama to an already intense rivalry. Every player knew that joining either team meant automatically inheriting decades of hatred for the other side. The rivalry peaked again in the 1990s and 2000s. Detroit and Chicago played some of their most memorable games during this era, with stars like Steve Yzerman and Chris Chelios for Detroit facing Chicago's Jeremy Roenick and Chris Chelios, who later joined Detroit, adding another layer to the rivalry. Their playoff matches during this period were some of the most watched games in NHL history. Even as the NHL changed around them, Blackhawks Red Wings remained a constant. Through 3 different NHL divisions and countless rule changes, these teams kept their rivalry alive. Their final season as division rivals in 2013 showed just how special this matchup was. Their playoff series that year was one of the most watched in NHL history. While conference realignment means these teams now meet less often, the history between them remains unmatched. The Blackhawks and Red Wings showed us that a great hockey rivalry needs 3 things: history, hatred, and respect. For over 80 years, they had all 3 in abundance. Rivalry number 1, Toronto Maple Leafs versus Montreal Canadiens. At number 1 stands the greatest rivalry in hockey history: the Toronto Maple Leafs versus the Montreal Canadiens. This isn't just a hockey rivalry. It's the story of Canada itself played out on ice. Since the NHL's first season in 1917, these teams have been at the heart of hockey's most intense feud. The numbers alone tell an incredible story. These teams have played each other over 800 times in regular season games and met in 5 Stanley Cup finals. But this rivalry goes deeper than statistics. It represents the divide between English and French Canada, between Ontario and Quebec, between 2 of hockey's most passionate cities. From the 1940s to the 1960s, these teams dominated the NHL. They combined to win 12 Stanley Cups in a 15-year span. During this golden age, a game between Toronto and Montreal wasn't just a hockey match. It was a national event. Families gathered around radios and television sets across Canada to listen to Foster Hewitt call the games, his voice becoming the soundtrack to Canadian Saturday nights. The rivalry gave hockey some of its most memorable moments. The 1967 Stanley Cup Finals, where the underdog Maple Leafs defeated the mighty Canadiens in Canada's centennial year. The 1979 playoff games that featured some of the sport's greatest players like Guy Lafleur and Darryl Sittler. The intense battles between goalies Johnny Bower and Jacques Plante that defined an era of hockey. What makes this rivalry special is how it connects generations. Grandparents who watched Maurice Richard face the Leafs in the 1950s passed their team loyalty down to children who saw Mats Sundin battle Saka Koivu in the 1990s. Today's fans watching Austin Matthews take on Nick Suzuki are part of a tradition that's over 100 years old. The rivalry has survived changes that would have killed lesser feuds. Through NHL expansion, changing divisions, and even long periods where one team dominated while the other struggled, Toronto-Montreal remains special. When these teams meet, the arenas are packed with fans whose families have held season tickets for generations. Even the players feel the weight of history in these games. Putting on a Maple Leafs or Canadiens jersey means joining one of hockey's greatest traditions. Rookies quickly learn that a goal against their historic rival counts a little more. Veterans know that their legacy will be partly defined by how they performed in these matchups. The passion of this rivalry extends beyond the rink. Montreal and Toronto are Canada's two largest cities, each considering itself the country's true hockey capital. The rivalry plays out in newspapers, on talk radio, and in countless arguments between fans. It's part of Canadian culture, referenced in movies, books, and everyday conversations. Today, the Toronto-Montreal rivalry remains as vital as ever. While other historic matchups have faded, these games still bring an extra level of intensity. The players might change, the arenas might be modernized, but the meaning behind this rivalry stays the same. It's more than just hockey. It's history, culture, and national pride all wrapped up in Canada's national sport. This is why Maple Leafs versus Canadiens stands as hockey's greatest rivalry. It has everything that makes sports special: history, passion, memorable moments, and most importantly, the power to bring people together while dividing them at the same time. In a changing sports world, this rivalry reminds us why we fell in love with hockey in the first place. These 5 rivalries tell us more than just the story of hockey. They show us why this sport means so much to so many people. From the intense 6-year battle between Detroit and Colorado to the century-old feud between Toronto and Montreal, each rivalry adds its own chapter to hockey's rich history. Great rivalries don't just happen by accident. They're built through playoff battles, memorable fights, outstanding performances, and moments that fans never forget. They're fueled by geography, culture, and pride. Most importantly, they're passed down through generations, with each new era adding its own stories to the legend. Today's NHL might look different from the league these rivalries were born in. The game is faster, the players are more skilled, and new rivalries emerge each season. But these classic matchups remind us of something important: that hockey is more than just a game. It's about community, tradition, and the pure emotion that comes from watching your team battle its greatest enemy. Whether it's the cultural clash of Bruins Canadiens, the city-splitting intensity of Rangers Islanders, the Midwest pride of Blackhawks Red Wings, or the national significance of Leafs Canadiens, these rivalries have helped make hockey what it is today. They've given us some of sport's greatest moments, created lasting memories for millions of fans, and shown us why hockey holds such a special place in people's hearts. As we look to hockey's future, new rivalries will certainly emerge. New stars will create new moments of magic, and new fans will find their own reasons to love this game. But these 5 historic rivalries will always stand as examples of what makes hockey special: the passion, the intensity, and the unbreakable connection between a team and its fans. In the end, that's what hockey rivalries are all about. They're about belonging to something bigger than yourself. They're about sharing the joy of victory and the pain of defeat with thousands of other fans. They're about the stories we tell, the traditions we keep, and the love of the game that brings us all together, even when we're cheering for opposite sides.